Welcome, children of all ages, to this wonderful resting time.
Hi, good day. This is Dr. Roxanne. Thank you for being here. We're focused on helping children help themselves, body, mind, and spirit. And today, the topic is about resources for parents of children with autism. We're privileged to have with us Jan Randell, who is our guest today. She is not only a mom, but happens to be the parent resource specialist at Community Autism Resources, a Southeastern organization in Massachusetts. I'm just going to tell you that I think it's awesome. Jan not only is married to her husband for 27 years, but is a mom of two wonderful adult children, a daughter who's 25, Allison, and she's a master's student in fine arts, and a son who's 22, Andrew, who has autism, bipolar disorder, and Tourette's syndrome. And I'm going to be asking Jan to talk a little bit about that journey as well as her role as parent resource specialist at Community Autism Resources. But more importantly, I think it's commendable to mention that Jan has been not only negotiating for her son and children with disabilities since her son was 3 years old, but she's actively been working with the community for the past 14 years. And I am going to ask her to describe what she does and the organization she works for that's doing such powerful, important work for kids and parents who really need it. Hi, Jan. Thanks so much for being with us today. Pleasure. Where would you like to begin? Do you want to talk a little bit about how you personally were affected, and did that inspire your position or role as activist and parent resource specialist, or did it work in reverse? Were you actually in, let's say, the social services, and then you had a child later on?
I actually got into this because of my son.
Okay.
I really kind of aspired to be Donna Reed.
Donna Reed.
I had my kids. I got married. My husband and I got married pretty young.
Mm-hmm.
He was 20 and I was 23.
Yeah.
And we had our daughter before he had even graduated college.
Wow.
I did not go to college. And I just fell into being a housewife and a mom, and I loved it more than anything. And then after my son was diagnosed, I found myself kind of thrown into this whole new world. And back in, when he was officially diagnosed, it was 1989.
Right.
It took me over 2 years before I met another parent.
Mm-hmm.
It's not... Back then, it wasn't like today, where parents, can almost instantaneously meet 2, 3, 5, 10 other parents.
Right. We're going to talk about the increase in diagnoses and numbers of kids and families who have increased and been identified over the years. But I think for the listening audience, it might be worthwhile for me to take a moment to describe autism, and for you to put in anything that you know on a personal level would be helpful.
Okay.
Typically, autism is a mental illness that affects a person's ability to communicate, form relationships with others, and respond appropriately to the environment. Some people with autism have few problems with speech and intelligence and are able to function relatively well in society, while others are mentally retarded or even mute or have serious language delays. In short, autism makes some people seem closed off and shut down, and others seem locked into repetitive behaviors and rigid patterns of thinking. how did your son fall into the diagnoses, and what were the signs, if you could give parents any, let's say, symptoms that would be helpful? Your child was 3.
Yeah. First,
what were some of the signs? Yeah.
First, I'd like to say that I think a lot of people today consider autism to be a neurobiological disorder, and we're finding a lot more about the biology of the body and the health of the body and how that affects the brain. And so for my son, of course, we didn't know this stuff back then, but he was typically developing child, toddler, hitting all his developmental milestones. And at 20 months, when he was 20 months old, I went to his pediatrician and said he's developed problems with constipation, and the language that he was using, he's not using as much anymore, and he's not adding any new words. And I was basically patted on the head and told, you worry too much. He's a boy. He's the second child. He's got an older sister who talks for him. He's fine. And so I sat back for a little more than a year waiting for him to be fine, and he was getting steadily worse and worse. He lost his eye contact. He started having severe meltdowns, or tantrums. He lost his words. He became completely echolalic, which is just repeating back what he heard.
Okay, but exactly how old was he when this started? 4 years?
He was 20 months when I first recognized something was wrong. He was we started the diagnostic process when my mother started prodding me just before he turned 3. My mother was a teacher and knew something was drastically wrong. But we had been through a pretty traumatic summer with my daughter with seizures. And so I didn't want to hear it. And my mom kept bugging me, and so a couple months after his 3rd birthday, which was early January, we set up an appointment for him to be seen by a psychologist. And she told me he couldn't possibly have autism because he loved me. And children with autism can't do that. And it took me another 9 months before we saw another psychologist who had some experience with children with autism, who recognized it right away and said, this is autism. But I knew it in my gut, as only a mom can know.
Right.
But everyone was telling me I was crazy.
Boy, these are distressing stories. These are first-hand accounts of the real world reaction to you. Lack of empathy and the possibility that you could be right was totally dismissed. I can imagine how sensitive you were having a kiddo right before him who already had a really challenging condition of seizure disorders, which is no easy task to surmount. So, of course, your attempts to get the attention from, your pediatrician or the medical community must have been very frustrating at times.
It was really frustrating because I'm looking at this little boy and that, I loved more than anything in the world and thinking something is not right.
So if you were to tell me how, as a mom, you were noticing his loss of eye contact and his words were becoming fewer and fewer, how did you at that time communicate with him? Did you try anything new? Were you using any sign language? Were there any ways that you were signaling each other nonverbally? Was he still connected socially and emotionally to you?
He was attached at my hip. Even with me, his eye contact got to the point where it was poor. It was worse with other people. He looked to me as his lifeline. I was the one who explained the world to him. I was the one who interpreted things for him.
Right.
I think I naturally knew how to slow my language down. how to just use short phrases, a couple of words, sticking to nouns, to help him understand things, showing him things and talking to him at the same time. He had been pointing, he stopped pointing to things, but he would take me by the hand and lead me places, and if he wanted juice, he would put my hand on the refrigerator and then pull my arm to open it, and then he would take my hand and put it on the juice. So he was finding ways to communicate with me.
Right.
He was trying really hard. You know, and we still have that very symbiotic relationship where I really can. I am the person who helps him understand the world.
Right. As he grew, how far along did you get before you really felt like there were some interventions that were helpful? I know we could just ask you simply, you know, what were, you know, the main challenges and how were they addressed? Who was there for you? Where were the resources? And then you can get into what Community Autism Resources has. Okay. So personally first, what were the challenges as you were noticing things were clear that he was not, you know, developing normally?
But this is probably going to sound strange. And if other parents are listening, I think they will understand completely what I'm saying.
Okay.
The biggest challenge I faced was other people not getting it. The school not getting it. The people that I talked to in the community not getting it. The pediatrician not getting it. Just everyone that I came into contact with, except for other parents and people who specialized in children with autism, and they were few and far between back then, and no one else got it, and I was just a human sponge trying to learn everything that I possibly could, and so it was extremely frustrating to be learning from parents who had gone before me, who had been walking this road, professionals who had expertise, and then talking to other people who just didn't get it at all and didn't want to get it. That was the most challenging aspect, and all these years later, that continues to be the most challenging aspect.
Oh, my God, no kidding. Well, see, I was thinking you were going to say that because that was the most challenging aspect, that you've somehow addressed it and managed to fix it. And it no longer is as bad as it was for you. But you know what? The truth, it will always set us free, and I think that this is an important aspect of the condition to address. And let's see how we can bring to the listening audience some helpful suggestions that will at least point them in the right direction, as you had to learn struggling on your own. Now that you know better and you have many more resources at your fingertips, what will you say to people who are just listening and hearing this and saying, oh, my God, I really would love to, you know, talk to this person, Jan, or know where else I can get more information, that she is a wealth of information and knowledge and experience?
I got my best information right back at the very beginning from other parents, because they were also out there just trying to get every bit of information that they could. Going to my first Autism Conference and walking into a room with my husband, we walked into a room and there were over 300 people there who all had kids with autism. And I got tears in my eyes because we weren't alone, and there were all these other people who were seeking that same knowledge. So I routinely, when I talk to parents, tell them, you know, and this is not to put down professionals who work in the field. I have been so fortunate, our family's been so fortunate to work with just some amazing autism consultants, you know, who specialize in working with people with autism and their families. But other parents have just been so amazingly helpful, not only finding things that are on the cutting edge and sharing that information, but to be supportive.
Yes.
You know, and say, to be able to laugh along with you at some of the horrifying stories that we share with one another.
Yeah, right.
Or to put their arm around you, you know, literally or figuratively, if it's through an email, to say, I've been there too. I understand how you're feeling right now.
I want you to consider giving a few more suggestions after we take a bit of a break to focus on one of the audio recordings that I have written in the Mind Works for Children series called From a Grain of Sand, I Can Make a Pearl. And one of the reasons why I want to share this with the audience and with you today is because you really did have to look to take that grain of sand and turn it into a pearl of wisdom, or to help your child to find the pearl, that way of going even deeper to connect with you and to stay tuned in. So let's take a few moments to shift gears and just sit back, Jan, and imagine that this is an excerpt from a story that really has to do with a youngster who finds an imaginary oyster, and the oyster is the one who shares the idea of turning a grain of sand into a pearl. So let's listen.
Now imagine. You can do it. You can make a pearl from a grain of sand. In the magic of now, all things are possible. In the magic of the moment, in this one and this one too, you can turn your pesky thoughts around and create something new. You can make a difference. You can make yourself feel better.
You can do it. Love yourself. Believe you can. And see love. Make your dreams come true.
Okay. Did you hear that?
I didn't know.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. I'll be able to circle back and let you hear it in its entirety. But in, let's say, summarizing, what I'm really pointing to on these audio relaxation programs for children and adults is really to do what you did in real life, is to somehow go deeper and below the surface of what appears to be resistance or lack of empathy or even frustration, and find within yourself a way to move through what appears to be something upsetting and find something of a treasure. Recently, at Harvard University commencement service, J.K. Rowling was the speaker. And as you know, J.K. wrote the Harry Potter books. And the title of her talk was The Fringe Benefits of Failure and the Importance of Imagination. And I think what you're attesting to today is how you took some frustrations around people who failed you, or even just a sense of determination, to use your own imagination and intuition to find solutions to your dilemma. And that is very powerful. There has been in the literature of the psychobiology and social psychology literature measurements of various types of support groups, like support groups of all people who are struggling with various things, let's say from cancers to, even learning disabilities. But their support, research test that the most powerful kind of social support is not necessarily from a church or a therapist. It's actually a veteran support group. It's exactly what you have attested to. It is being with people who, no, I'm sure it doesn't surprise you, because when you told me the impact walking into that room had on you, I can only imagine a sense of relief mixed with just overwhelm of like, wow, I'm not alone. But on the other hand, it was like you were being held back and isolated to some extent because there was no connection. How did you find that connection with all of these parents? You had to find it yourself.
Yeah, it's funny, too, that you mentioned support groups, because it was a couple of years after that, because I met other parents at support groups. Sometimes we'd run into each other at the supermarket, or just pick up the phone and call each other, and we'd be, standing in the aisle in the market for an hour talking, that I did start a parent support group. And that was really a wonderful thing. The group ran for 10 years. I think at our highest point we had about 50 members of the group, and I'm still friendly today, years later, with some of those women.
That's awesome.
That I met through the support group. And that does go, to what you were saying earlier, of taking that grain of sand and making a pearl from it. From all the parents that I've talked to over the years, and parents that I've actually met through, like, online groups, one of the things that you will repeatedly hear parents say, and I've said myself, there is a certain measure of guilt that we all feel sometimes because of the incredible impact autism has had on our lives, that we have met.
Explain this a little bit, Jan. What do you mean that you would have, you would feel guilty? What are you feeling guilty about? What exactly are you feeling guilty about? What do you mean?
The guilt that all of us sometimes feel because we look at our lives and the people that we have met and the things that we have experienced. And all of us can say, if not for autism, I would not have had this experience. If not for autism, I wouldn't have met these people. And so on a certain level, your son or daughter's horrible suffering,
right,
and, has been a positive thing in some areas of your life. I've come to be fairly comfortable with that now. But I totally understand the feeling. I wouldn't be working where I'm working if it wasn't for autism.
Exactly. And
I wouldn't be here today in the way that I am. I wouldn't be the person that I am today. I'm a completely different person than I was 25 years ago.
Wow.
And it's all because of autism.
So at what point, I can believe you, and, we are all souls evolving on a journey, called life, and asked to step up and be the best we can be in every way, every day. But I think you're right. Sometimes when you get a humbling experience like this, it really does make you either completely collapse in on yourself or rise up above it and really take it to the next level. And it seems to me like you've done the latter. You've taken it to the next level.
I've seen people do both. I've had friends who have done both. Just reach a certain point with it and say, I'll accept the fact that my child has autism, but I'm not going to discuss it. We're not going to do anything super special. It was just too much. And I've had a lot of people tell me, how do you do it? You live autism, 24/7 with your son, and then you do it for work. What are you, crazy?
Yeah, really. I was just about to say, when you say you have, learned quite a bit, let's see if we can be more specific about what you would recommend for the listening audience out there to get over the certain measure of guilt if they can. Do you have any suggestions that have helped you?
I think the thing that's helped me the most is to just know in my heart, know in my mind that you do what you have to do to get through. And even though I wouldn't wish my son's kind of autism, because there is a huge debate in the autism community right now about people with Asperger's syndrome and higher functioning autism, and how good they feel about themselves and how they don't want autism cured. They like who they are. And then families of children who are so severely affected that life can be hell. My son's kind of autism I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy.
So why is that? Can you give us a picture of what that's like for you and for him? All right, you took it up to 3 years old he was diagnosed. Give me a little bit of a sense of his, preschool years, like 3 to 5 and upward. How did you walk through what was going down and discovering ways to cope with it?
Very carefully. It's probably the easiest thing to say. We really groped our way through those first probably, I want to say, 6 or 7 years. It probably when he got to be about 9 is when I really, really started feeling comfortable with what I knew. Because I was learning so much more by that time I was starting to work in the field, and we had been through a lot of different things with him. So, he went to a number of different programs. He bounced around a lot with schools. He started at a private school for children with autism on the advice of a friend who I have the utmost respect for, who's been traveling this journey with me since our boys were 5. We brought him into public school. Andrew stayed there for a couple of years in public school. It didn't work out. It was a really ugly ending for him. He moved back to the private school for children with autism. That didn't work out either for him. So he moved around a lot. And it was also during that time that he developed the Tourettes syndrome, that he started seeing. We started taking him to a psychiatrist for the Tourettes. Well, we were already taking him, but he helped us with the Tourettes. And then we started the process of figuring out what else was going on. And it took a few years, but he was eventually diagnosed with bipolar disorder, too, which I think he had symptoms of from the time he was about 3.
Wow.
That were being blamed on the autism.
Yeah. Can you tell me if you feel comfortable just very simply defining Tourette's syndrome for those parents who may actually have kids who have it, but they're not diagnosed yet?
For Andrew, the tics came on overnight.
What are tics?
The tics are can be vocal sounds. It can be a throat clearing or a humming. Right. Or almost those whoop whoop sounds like a siren. They can also be motor movements, either a jerking of the head or blinking, movement of the arms. Right. And also Tourette's can also be comprised of movement disorder, where a person takes a step forward and then a step back and a step forward, and they can get stuck in motion. And it's like a sneeze. They can't control it. Wow. They can feel it coming, And when that tic comes, it has to come out. Some people who just have Tourette's syndrome, what we call neurotypical people who don't have autism, who just have Tourette's, can't control their tics to some extent. For Andrew, it's extremely difficult for him to control his tics.
I know from my experience, even with adults who we were teaching mindfulness meditation, just to use any method of helping them to watch their own thoughts, watch their behavior, watch their impulses. It was something that could affect change, but, again, it has to do with the cognitive level and the ability of the individual to be able to actually use the mindfulness as a viable, effective strategy. Bipolar, go ahead.
That's been a struggle with us for years for Andrew, to try to do, different types of relaxation with him to help him feel more calm and more centered, because that also has an impact on the bipolar for him, too. When he is very revved up and, he's overstimulated, and not the classic manic phase that you might see with people who are out, gambling and, buying everything in the store. For Andrew, because of his disability, it's a little bit different. But, using things like relaxation, but, because of the autism, the problems that he has with language, and because he's very visually oriented, it takes a lot of practice. And then even at times where he needs to be able to, where you or I could say, oh, my gosh, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Right. Here, I can do my relaxation exercise or my meditation. He can't always access that. He can't always think. Or if he does even think of it, he can't do it. He needs someone to be there to kind of help him.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot more, adaptive methods that are being explored. The guest who was on last week talked about the studies that they're doing in California in this area of working the brain and understanding the capacity of the brain in various disorders and challenges. I would imagine that the bipolar disorder, even at 3 years old, you could see play out in his explosive nature, as you said, these severe meltdowns and these primal screams that you think you're going to, die if, you don't do something for him. And yet it's part of the condition, and it's very frightening for a parent to hear their child or to attempt to allay some of the struggle and stress when they're in the midst of these outbreaks. How did you handle that?
I learned two things, and what's the phrase? You're kind of flying by the seat of your pants.
Yeah, right.
I learned two things really, really quickly, and the first one was I need to be patient. I discovered patience that I never knew that I had. The other thing, which was kind of funny because it wasn't something, it was something that I was very not good at all at doing, was being calm. I was always a very nervous person. I had problems with anxiety attacks. And after Andrew was diagnosed, a lot of those problems went away. I was so focused on him. So here I was, this very kind of nervous person who could get thrown off very easily and get very panicky. And I had this 3-year-old who could literally scream hysterically, throwing himself on the floor for an hour. I had to learn to get very, very calm. So when he would start, it was almost like I mentally would take this big step backwards and this giant, deep kind of cleansing breath and go, okay, I'm on. It was like almost like walking out on stage for a play. I just put myself in another place to help him. That was my complete and total focus, was get through this until he's calm.
What was the most helpful way for you to use these two things that you learned, being calm and extending your patience? How did you reach him, and could you shorten any of these severe meltdowns?
Sometimes I got lucky, and I did, and I really want to call it luck because I don't really know how much it had to do with me. And it was funny, I was talking to another mom the other day, and she was talking about her child's severe meltdown, and she said, I have to talk him down. And I was like, oh my gosh, those are the exact words that I used to use. I have to talk him down. And sometimes I would just pick him up in my arms. And he was a big kid. He was a big baby. So he was a big kid for his age. I would pick him up in my arms and hold him in my lap and rock him in the rocking chair. And just, it was like this mantra of, it's okay. It's all done now. It's okay. It's all done now. Or I would sit at the end of my bed, and he would stand between my legs and kind of hang, facing me, and put his arms over my legs and just kind of hang there and thrash around and scream. And I would do the same thing, you know, and touch him when he would let me touch him, pat his back or rub his back. And he learned at 3 that I could help him when he lost control, that I was a very safe place to go when he lost control, and that I would help him get that control back. And that's been really important to the two of us
I can imagine.
Over all these years.
Right, right.
He has a very deep trust of me.
Of course. I have to commend you once again, Jan, on your wisdom and your mother's intuitive sense of how to handle what you had no, training to do, no experience. It just fell
It was
onto
mother's
you.
intuition.
It was mother's
really
intuition.
What it was.
And, you know, it's one of the first things I say to moms who tell me that their kids are all upset and fired up and this and that. I said, look, you know, what if they do on the airplanes? They say you've got to put that oxygen mask on yourself before you can put it on your child.
Absolutely.
And intuitively, that's what you were trying to say. For yourself, I need to stay calm, be patient. I need to do this in order for me to talk him down, which is a beautiful segue into the next clip from the CD called From a Grain of Sand, which you're going to get a free copy of, Jan.
Thank you.
For listening and being with us today as a very special guest and a very helpful words of wisdom for parents who are out there really wanting to know more. So here we go. This is what I would say is an aspect or an excerpt from that part of the CD where I'm asking kids to really use their awareness of their breathing and slow down and just be in the magic of now.
Breathe deep, breathe long. Oh yes, breathing deep and breathing long is how you find the moment of magic, the magic of now. And now that you know purling begins with Y-O-U, now is the moment to try something new. Say to yourself, I can breathe myself happy. I can see myself happy.
All right, so you were able to get a little taste of that.
Yeah, that was excellent.
Mm-hmm. And you can imagine if you had that playing on in the background, that could also help to shift the whole atmosphere, because what happens when a kid, especially 3, 4, 5-year-olds, they're really so young and tender. You're just like terrified. What is going on here? He can't go on like this. It's not healthy. And you're upset because he's upset. And how can you be in your power or your calm, let's say that, when you're, in a way, getting freaked out also?
Yeah, I would freak out later.
You would freak out later. Well, that was, again, you just have really good instincts and emergency first aid. that seems to be, you're a real natural, which is bringing me into the next question I have about, tell us about Community Autism Resources as an organization that supports over 1,800 individuals in Southeast Massachusetts, and how did you make that connection? At what point, was it after the private school trials that you started at age 9 to get more involved, or was it before that?
I was lucky. One of the first people that I spoke to, and I think the first time I met her was at that conference that I talked about that my husband and I went to, was our executive director, Barbara Domain, who just happened to live all of probably about, 8 miles from our home, and she had a son with autism too.
Wow.
And Andrew was probably about 6 or 7 at the time, and she was working with a group and was able to get some grant money to start Community Autism Resources. And in the beginning, it was our executive director all alone by herself with a phone. And she brought in a number of families from out the area who had children with autism and some professionals and said, what do families need? And so that's how Community Autism Resources really started. When Andrew was 8.5, I had been taking some college classes, and I had gotten hurt and pulled out of school and decided to come here and volunteer my time because I wanted to continue to connect with other families, and I felt like I had found a niche that this is what I was supposed to be doing with my life, is helping other families and sharing things.
Right.
And so I kind of fell into this when Community Autism Resources was able to get enough funding. I was hired, and another woman was hired. The two of us were hired at the same time. And so we've been here. It'll be 14 years officially in September, but I had started in May, so it was 14 years in May.
Oh, my God, Jan.
So what we do is we provide information, referrals, some services to families where they can make private appointments with professionals on our staff. And so we are one of the autism projects in Massachusetts that provides help and services to families. Families can pick up the phone and call in. And
what's the number to call, Jan? People who are listening, what's the number to call in if they're listening and they'd like to make that call?
Who live here in southeastern Massachusetts, and we actually do get calls from people in different areas of the United States who are thinking about moving to Massachusetts. Our number is 508-379-0371. And there's a directory on there when you call in so that you can figure out who you need to speak with.
So once again, that number is 508-379-0371.
Correct. And we'll help direct. I've had people call, from nearby states and direct them to resources in their states. And that's my role here. One of the many hats that I wear is, and my primary one is resource specialist. So helping families find the resources, that they need, answering questions.
Right. One of the most frequently asked questions, which I have a feeling you're expert at by now, has to do with the question of private schools for children with autism versus mainstreaming, if that's at all possible. What's your take on that?
It's as individual as every child.
What makes it
probably the question that we get before that one, though?
Yeah.
that's kind of almost the second question. The first question is that a lot of parents ask is, they'll say, I'm not an expert in autism. Mm-hmm. How can I possibly know what therapies are going to help my child? Mm-hmm. And I tell parents that, number one, you don't need to be an expert in autism. You're an expert in your child. Right. You need to trust your gut, and then you need to do research. So it would be the same whether you were looking at the wide, huge scope that's out there of therapies for children with autism, or whether you were looking at schools. You have to go in and you have to do your research. You have to look at the different options that are available for you. Mm-hmm. Then you have to ask some questions. How does this mesh with my parenting philosophy? How does this mesh with my own parenting style? How does this mesh with our family? My child's personality. How will this impact my child and the type of child that they are beyond the autism?
Right.
And look at all those things so that you can begin to make good decisions. Mm-hmm. And then part two to that whole decision-making process is parents need to know, they need to tell themselves, I will make mistakes. I will do all my homework. I will do all my research. And I will make my best judgment. And I will find out 3 months later that that was a really, really bad decision. Mm. And you have to be comfortable knowing that you're going to make mistakes, but they're generally not irrevocable, that you learn something from that, you step back and you say, okay, where did I mess up here? What was wrong in my thinking? And move on from there. I do it all the time. I still make mistakes. Making a decision based on my best judgment of what I know about my son and what I know about autism, and not having enough information. Sometimes you make a decision and or just going with what you can get for information, and it's the wrong decision. And so you go, you know what? Okay, I made a wrong decision. And now
good point. That's a very good point, because the other question I get a lot has to do with medication and whether medication is really helpful or more harmful, or what kind. And it's a real major issue for which comes up very often.
It is a big major issue. And
what have you learned over the years, and how do you support families who are trying to find answers?
I do get that question a lot. My husband and I joke a lot. My son is on a variety of medications for his bipolar disorder. And my husband and I joke about the fact that we always said, we never wanted to have to go that route. I think that the number one thing that I tell parents is find a good psychiatrist, someone who has the right level of expertise. And my son's psychiatrist was absolutely sent from heaven. And we're very fortunate that we live within 3 miles of a children's psychiatric hospital. I think it might even be one of the oldest ones in the country. And his psychiatrist, his area of expertise is children and adults with developmental disabilities who have psychiatric disorders. And so we were very fortunate. So finding a good psychiatrist who's going to work with you, and then making sure that you're respected when you ask your questions, that they don't talk down to you. And that was nice, too, because his doctor we spent our first 3 appointments just discussing medication. It wasn't, and I've talked to so many people who walk in and 15 minutes later they walk out with a prescription. We spent almost 3 hours over 3 appointments talking about his issues, what was going on, different kinds of medications, how they were going to impact. And he's always willing to have those in-depth discussions with me. And when I say no, he's like, okay. He always defers to what I say. And I think that's really important when it comes to medication, because medication is that merry-go-round that once you get on it, it's hard to get off. It's really hard to get off. And I've talked to parents who have like 3-year-olds on some pretty heavy medication. You know, that it scares me. It scares me to hear that kind of stuff. You know, because you wonder how in depth, you know, did the family and the doctor go in really hammering this out, and were there other, you know, available things?
Exactly.
For instance, relaxation, teaching children relaxation. You know, can we use this and see how that works? You know, and maybe we can help 25% of this child's severe anxiety or panic attacks with some relaxation.
Right.
You know, before.
Which reminds me, let me just remind the listeners that if they are interested in relaxation training and audios, they can go on mindworksforchildren.com. That's MINDWORKS for children.com. You know, you have some really wonderful events, fun family events, and family drumming events, and all kinds of things that are happening through the resources that you offer. Can you spend 2 minutes before we have to close just speaking about the special events and maybe some upcoming events?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, great.
One of the things that we're dedicated to doing here is doing family events. We found that families like to have a safe place where there are going to be lots of other families with kids with autism there. So we do a lot of those. The big event that we have coming up this September is it's a walk for autism. So it is.
What's the date?
It's September 20th. It is a fundraiser for us, but beyond that, it is a family fun day. All the games for the children and the bounce house and the bubble creation station, those are all free. There's free food. And
can you give us a website or somewhere where people who are listening can look it up and find out more information? Yep.
It's www.community-autism-resources.org. So it's Community Autism Resources with a dash in between and then .org. And there's information up there. We constantly update our information about different events that are coming up.
That sounds great. What town is that in?
That's going to be in Fall River, Massachusetts, at a local community college called Bristol Community College.
Bristol Community College, September 20th. What time does it start?
It runs from 9:30 until 1:30 in the afternoon.
Sounds
and the family
awesome.
events go all day, even while a lot of people will be out on the walk. The family events run for families who can't take their kids out on a 2-mile walk.
Right. Tell us a little bit about that family drumming event that happened this February. How do you, let's say, decide what kind of events for families, and, again, where families can go to look them up?
We try different events, and then we always work really hard at getting feedback from families to hear from them. You know, did it work? Did it not work? Family drumming has been really popular over the years. We've been doing it, I think, for 10 years now. We do it a few times a year. We bring in a master drummer, Bob Bloom from Connecticut, and he brings his drums, and the children and parents join together in doing just some really incredible drumming rhythms along with Bob. And it's a short, kind of sweet session. It's 45 minutes, and then there's
sounds good
time for fun and snacks and chat.
It sounds like so much fun, Jan. I hate to cut us off, but we're running close to our time to say goodbye, and hope to see you all next week on Mind Works for Children, helping children help themselves. And this week we want to thank from the bottom of our hearts Jan Randell for giving us so much of herself and her heart around these issues that are really challenging, and I can see how much you give and what a gift you are, Jan, to your community and to your family and ultimately the world. All right, blessings to you. Have a great day. Bye for now. Until next week, we'll say, Mind Works for Children, helping children help themselves, body, mind, and spirit.